Moscow's most elite soldiers weren't deployed to battlefields. They were buried inside Western cities, waiting for orders that might never come. It's 1982. A Soviet deep-cover operative sits in a Stockholm apartment, watching the street below through net curtains. His orders, classified at the highest levels of the GRU, the Soviet Military Intelligence Directorate, are to prepare for a war that everyone hopes won't happen. He isn't alone. Across Europe, in North America and Japan, dozens like him maintain false identities, dead drops, and contingency plans. Their mission sabotage, their timeline unknown, their existence officially deniable. Let me back up. To understand what the GRU Spetsnaz sabotage units actually were, we need to step into this museum exhibit and look at the organizational chart right here. See this distinction. The KGB handled foreign intelligence and internal security, but the GRU under the Ministry of Defense had something far more specialized: military intelligence with a sabotage wing. These weren't James Bond figures. They were something more methodical, more terrifying in their precision. The Spetsnaz units we're discussing, not the commando units everyone knows about, were small teams trained to blend in, establish cover, and wait. Some waited for years, decades even. They were sleeper agents with military training embedded in infrastructure, power plants, communications hubs, military installations. The irony, and there's always an irony in this business, is that we only know about them because of defectors. The most valuable came in the 1980s, when Soviet officers began seeing the cracks in the system. One particular defector, whose name remains partially classified even now, revealed the scope: dozens of prepositioned teams across NATO countries, each with specific targets and demolition expertise. Look at this map pinned to the wall here. The red dots represent known or suspected Spetsnaz sabotage cells. France, 3 confirmed, West Germany, at least 6. Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark all had them. Some were so embedded they had families, mortgages, jobs, they were neighbors. The person next to you at the grocery store might have been one. Probably wasn't, but statistically might have been. Their training was extraordinary. We have documents captured after the Soviet collapse showing curricula: explosives engineering, sabotage of industrial equipment, improvisation with civilian materials, psychological resilience training to endure years of isolation. Some units specialized in targeting NATO early warning radar systems, others focused on communications infrastructure. A few were tasked with something darker: biological or chemical contamination of water supplies. The strategic logic was brutal and clear. If war came to Europe, if NATO and the Warsaw Pact ever crossed that threshold, these teams would activate simultaneously. Coordinated strikes across the continent, cripple communications, destroy command centers, contaminate supply lines. By time for Soviet conventional forces to advance before NATO nuclear response could coordinate. It was sabotage as a military instrument, not terrorism. But here's what makes this story hinge on a single word: never. These units never activated, not once. The orders never came. The war they'd trained for, the one they'd sacrificed years of normal life to prepare for, never happened. By the late 1980s, as the Soviet Union fractured, many were simply abandoned, left in place with no contact, no updates, no clear status. Some were recalled, some defected. Some, we suspect, simply tried to disappear into their cover identities, becoming the people they'd pretended to be for so long that the line blurred. And some, we probably don't know about them. There's a possibility, however small, that somewhere in Western Europe right now, someone is living a quiet life with a false name and a dead letterbox they haven't checked in 30 years. What we learned from declassified documents after 1991 was staggering. The GRU had invested enormous resources, money, training, time into a contingency that never materialized. Hundreds of operatives, possibly thousands globally, had their entire adult lives structured around a war scenario that the world narrowly avoided. The Cold War's closest call wasn't a missile crisis or a standoff. Sometimes it was just a person waiting in an apartment for orders that would never come. The Spetsnaz sabotage units represent something most Cold War histories skip over: the infrastructure of catastrophe, not the weapons themselves, but the human apparatus built specifically to use them. The people trained, positioned, and psychologically prepared to destroy the world if told to. And then when the moment passed, they were simply orphaned, cut loose into a history that had moved on without them. Some defectors reported that in the final years, morale among these units was catastrophic. They'd given up their lives for a mission that was becoming increasingly unlikely. The Soviet system was collapsing, orders were irregular, command structures were breaking down. By 1990, some units didn't even know if their handlers were still alive, still in power, or still committed to activation protocols. There's a particular telegram in our archives, partially redacted but authentic, dated March 1991, from a GRU regional commander to an unknown recipient. It reads, status of Northern European cells unclear. Recommend recall or permanent cover transition. War scenario assessment, probability negligible. Request guidance. The response, silence. That silence is the entire story of how empires end. What happened to these operatives is largely unknown. Some files remain classified, some were absorbed into post-Soviet intelligence services, some simply vanished from official records entirely. A few went public, wrote memoirs, gave interviews under assumed names. The stories are consistent: years of isolation, psychological strain, the erosion of any clear purpose. They were soldiers without a war. The larger lesson here, and it's worth sitting with, is that the Cold War wasn't just about missiles or ideology. It was about human infrastructure built on the assumption of catastrophe. Thousands of lives structured around an event that never happened. Billions of rubles spent on contingencies that never activated. It was a civilization-scale bet, and when the bet didn't pay off, the people who'd sacrificed everything were simply left behind. Today, those units are history. The GRU still exists, still operates, still conducts sabotage, but the Cold War's specific apparatus of sleeper agents and prepositioned teams is largely defunct. What remains is declassified files, defector accounts, and the strange ghost of a military strategy that almost consumed the world but never quite did. And somewhere, maybe, someone who spent their youth preparing for Armageddon is living quietly under a name that isn't theirs. The files in this exhibit are just the beginning. Most Spetsnaz sabotage unit records remain sealed, most operatives remain unknown, and that's perhaps the most unsettling part of this history. We don't know how many, where they are, or what they're doing now. The Cold War ended, but its shadows are still very much with us. Subscribe to uncover more untold Cold War histories. There's a declassified case waiting every week.